Welcome to All the F Words,
a podcast where two writer friends, nearly 30 years apart, explore everything we give an F about. I'm Gabby Moskowitz.
And I'm Joanne Green. On each episode of All the F Words, we'll focus on a theme, starting with the letter F. Things like fortune, foolishness, and forgiveness.
We'll share stories from our lives and our distinct generational perspectives and look to the experts for insights and ideas.
Today, we're going to talk about filth. Filth as in smut. Filth as in porn, erotic literature, and more.
We'll get into why exactly these things are considered filthy by so many people and the impact repressive culture has on an individual's sexual self-development.
And lucky us, we have a guest today.
That's right. Rebecca Key, friend of the pod and real-life friend of both of us, is here, and she has a lot to say about the subject.
Hi, I'm Rebecca. I'm so excited to be here with you.
Rebecca, it's so exciting that you're here. We've been talking about this for a while, and I want to start by sharing that the idea for this episode was actually Rebecca's idea. So Rebecca knows both Joanne and me, and Joanne and I made this huge list of F words when we were first getting started. And Rebecca, I believe it was your idea that filth needs to be one of them.
Oh, I've been begging to discuss filth with both of you, and in fact, I have many times before. But this is the first three-way.
It's the first three-way, and it's the first public showing. So we're a little exhibitionist today, is what we're saying here, right?
Correct.
Exactly.
And before we jump in, I just want to say if any other listeners have any great F words that you think we should cover, and maybe you even think you're an expert on an F word, let us know. And you know how to email us, right? It's allthefwordspod@gmail.com.
Yep, let us know. And maybe we'll even invite you to come on. This is also our first ever time having a guest, which is so exciting. So we're going to get some good practice with Rebecca.
So you're saying it's a virgin experience for all of us?
Yes. Rebecca is going to be...
You're our gerbil. I was going to say guinea pig, but I'm saying gerbil for this episode.
Gerbil, as in a Richard Gere kind of gerbil. You're popping our three-way guest cherry. We're just going to try to make this. This is just going to be 45 minutes
filthy.
Of us making sex jokes as much as possible.
Filth.
I love it.
So we are considering filth. Obviously, we've talked a lot about sex on this podcast in general, but we've talked specifically when we did our First Times episode, we talked a lot about virginity and purity culture. And so today we're talking specifically about, we're defining filth as sex content, to use the word that the kids use today, content, where whether it's pornography, photos, I know pornography has a lot of definitions, videos, or specifically, we're going to talk a lot today about erotic literature, also known as erotica. Content you create that is sexy. One thing I have noticed for sure is that TV and films have changed a lot in terms of how much is allowed to be shown on screen now. Have you guys noticed that?
Well, obviously I have, because, I was watching television in the 1950s and, sex did not exist.
Was it even referred to? Like, were there sort of like roundabout jokes or references?
Yes, but they were misogynist and not... Mm-hmm. Nowhere was it ever acknowledged that women had sexuality or would ever be interested in something like erotic literature, much less the visual image as a turn on.
Wow.
Nowhere.
Yeah.
Didn't shows at that time, instead of having a king bed for the married couple, have two twin beds side by side?
100%. Absolutely. Ward and June did not have sex. I'm just here to say. You guys don't even know who Ward and June are. They'll Leave It to Beaver parents.
The Cleavers.
You do?
The Cleavers.
The Cleavers. The Cleavers.
There was Nick at Night when I was a kid.
She had to take off that apron sometimes.
Yeah. Well, and I assume when it was when they were going to make another Cleaver child, they would go over into one of the beds. They didn't push them together. I don't know logistically how that works, but
No,
you know,
two children. No, two children. They had sex twice.
Oh, okay. Okay. Right.
That's it.
So I thought we would start this off. So one thing that is different about my relationship with Rebecca than with any of my other friends is that Rebecca and I have, well, okay, I'm not even sure where to start this, but
she's embarrassed.
Longtime listeners of the show know that whenever I start to blush and get flustered, I just sort of start babbling and start sentences over and over and over again. I'll cut right to it to the extent that I'm able. I don't even remember if you prepared me the first time you sent me a nude, Rebecca, but I remember the first one you ever sent. And it wasn't fully nude because it was a holiday themed nude. And I believe you had bows covering at least some of your naughty parts. Let's not call them naughty. That's ridiculous. Or of some of your body parts.
See, you're buying into the repressive culture. Listen to
I know. We're gonna confront see, I don't think of myself as repressed, but then I do often confront things that let me know that I am perhaps embarrassed about things I shouldn't be.
Let me just interject. You don't think of yourself as repressed, but I'm guessing Rebecca thinks of you as repressed.
No, not repressed, but just a little buttoned up.
A little sometimes, you know? Yeah. It's true. I mean, I think that that's because I grew up, I didn't grow up in the 1950s, but I grew up in this world in the world in which we live, where sort of, you know, like as I was discovering my sexuality, I was getting very mixed messages about it, you know, and I think like in the 90s, you know, when I was sort of coming of age was a really complicated time. Every time is complicated to come of age, but it was complicated because there were really specific ideals of what a body should look like, what a woman's body should look like. And then, you know, you were supposed to be Britney Spears, right? You were supposed to be Britney Spears. Like early Britney Spears was such a perfect characterization of the Madonna whore complex, you know, because she was so sexy and so hot. And, you know, I don't know, Joanne, if you remember the Hit Me Baby One More Time music video, but she's like, is dressed like a schoolgirl and she's got these pigtails and she looks very young and innocent. And she's also gyrating and being really sexy. And that for me really summarizes what the world felt like when I was coming into my sexuality. So getting back to the nudes thing, Rebecca has sent me nudes, some nude, sexy, fun pictures of herself that she was proud of and excited about. And as a good, friend who prioritizes and cares about reciprocation, I have sent Rebecca nudes. I've sent 2 people on this earth that I can remember nudes, and one is Rebecca and one is my husband. And I think I probably sent Rebecca more nudes than I have sent Evan, because there have just not that many times when I have thought to take a naked picture of myself. But I felt really empowered to do this because when I first got pregnant with my oldest child, Rebecca said, take a naked picture of your body. So I did. And then I sent it to her because she had already sent me pictures. So that is my my nude experience. Beck, will you talk a little bit about your nude photography background?
Yes, I would love to. So it's funny that you bring up the first nude I sent you, because I took it up here right in this room, in my attic level, where I set up my camera to take photos of myself with a timer. And it was around the holidays, and I had some Christmassy bows lying around, some of those stick-on ribbons. And I stuck them onto a few parts of myself.
Listeners, you can't see Joanne, but yeah, no, she's making she's wincing at the idea of putting bows on her nipples.
It was not a painful experience. It was fun. And I took some just laughing, kind of silly, lighthearted photos and thought, how funny would it be to send some of these to friends while it's, approaching Christmas? This is going to be my unofficial holiday greeting card to some of my beloved friends. And I sent them, it was all to mom friends, like women who were well into their adulthood, who knew me really well. And there was a lot of joyful hilarity that ensued about why I was doing this and, where they were sitting or what they were doing when they randomly received this on their phone. I knew there was risk involved. And in retrospect, it was a time before we were having so many conversations about consent and, unsolicited photos. And I am more careful now to make sure before I ever send such things to friends to just make sure that they're okay with it.
So interesting. I know you won't be surprised to know that I've never sent a nude picture of myself anywhere and to anyone. And in fact, I don't even know that there is a nude picture of me anywhere. Certainly not digitally because, I think it's obvious why. But back in the day, you had to get your film developed. So if you took a nude picture of yourself and sent that film into your local CVS or camera store, I don't think they would develop it. In fact, a very funny thing happened when my son was, I don't know how old, and went one summer to a camp. Okay, I'll say it, Camp Tawonga. And when I had his film developed, there were pictures of girls flashing him, like just picking up their T-shirts. I think he was like 11 or something. And and I was very surprised that the camera store developed them.
Well, you and I actually have a longer history than I think either of you would remember of exchanging some kind of nudes, because I took a photo of your son's butt on a bus in Israel. And it was in my Israel photo album. And you saw that photo and you said, that's my boy. I recognize that butt.
See, this doesn't even ring a bell. This just shows what happens to your memory when you get past a certain age. You just delete files. That one got deleted, but I love it. And I would probably recognize his butt. Yes.
While we're talking about, to harken back to our earlier conversation about if 20 plus years ago we were having a conversation or somebody said one day on a podcast, you would be discussing, erotica with Becky. I think also it would also be an amusing thing to imagine that one day on a podcast you would be discussing erotica and a photograph of your son's butt on a podcast. That would.
Yeah, I mean, on the one hand, I think that would be really surprising, and like Rebecca said at the beginning, in another hand, no, not at all. I mean, I did a feminist talk show in the 70s. I talked about all kinds of things.
Yeah,
including maybe this, but who knows?
And now you've received one of my more recent nudes yourself, Joanne, and I did send it without warning yesterday, but I felt that because we had agreed to have this conversation today, that was implicit consent. I hope I'm correct.
100%. Send more. Loved. Hashtag loved it.
I have personally been watching a show on my computer with my husband while a picture from Rebecca has come through. And so, consent isn't always a bad thing. So anyway, I want to talk a little bit about, so we've talked a little bit about nudes. Well, actually, let's talk a little bit more about nudes, because we've talked about the nudes we've sent. But I want to talk a little bit about the experience of taking photos. And I will start as somebody who has gone through a variety of different phases of feelings about my body, somebody who has had 2 children and watched just in the last 5 years lots and lots of changes in my body. I was very surprised by how empowering it was to see my naked body, not just, well, first of all, to play with like light and poses and all that kind of stuff. I haven't quite graduated to like costumes, although I do think there weren't any costumes involved, but I did once send Rebecca a naked picture when I was on a boat, and that was pretty cool. But so playing with settings and backgrounds, I guess. But it was surprising and really exciting to me how empowering it was to look at my naked body, not just the way it looks in the mirror when I look at it every day when I get dressed, but in a way that perhaps somebody else might see it. And I just well, 10 out of 10 recommend. I think that everyone should do that. And Joe, I think you don't have to send them. You could send them to Fred, but I think you should take them.
You should.
Now that you have an iPhone, I think you should do it.
I think I might. Who knows? I do remember I was into fine art photography when I was in college. I was studying it and doing all my own printing and developing and all that of both black and white and color at the time. And I don't know how I did this, but I somehow convinced my mom to let me photograph her breasts. Her face wasn't in the picture. And she was the most modest person in the universe. But I do have those photos. And then my sister was pregnant at the time. And I took a lot of pictures of her nude. I mean, subtle legs crossed over, not showing the. But I had forgotten all about that until just now. So I do have all those.
What was it
and
like?
I developed them myself, so I didn't have to send them into a place to be developed.
What was it like photographing your mom, knowing especially that she tends to be so kind of buttoned up and modest?
I felt really powerful that I had been able to convince her that this was an artistic endeavor. And that it had nothing to do with sex. I had to tell her it had nothing to do with sex. It was about the beauty of the human body. We talked about sculptors sculpting nudes and, painters painting nudes and all that. But yeah, because sex was like, no. Shh,
so Rebecca, I'm curious, you're the, you're the expert here in this, at least in this group, when it comes to nudes. Can you talk a little bit about do you remember the first nude that you took of yourself?
Yes, I have a couple from my high school days that were just topless photos that, both of you know from my younger years that I was an insatiable flirt and I loved to connect with people and be flirtatious and enjoy that playfulness. And so it was probably in my mid-teens that I took my first topless photo and, showed it to someone in high school and felt that thrill of being vulnerable and exposing myself. But then I really didn't take any others for many, many years. It wasn't something I was at all interested in. And despite being a flirt and feeling like a sexual person, I was buttoned up. I was not comfortable fully expressing myself. And it felt a lot more like posturing and trying to play a role and be a certain thing. And I think it wasn't until I was a full-fledged adult, and honestly, until I was a mom, that I saw myself as this whole woman, this whole person that I've grown into, who I've put in enough work to really like myself and see myself and not be trying to impress anyone in a particular way, but more to be showing the world, hey, world, this is who I am. This is where I'm at. This is what I've done. And it became something I noticed as my friends and I entered our 30s, that I felt this power of us as women coming into our own. It's sort of talked about casually that women hit their sexual peak later than men. And I don't think I disagree. I think that adds up to me for what I've seen amongst my friends. And I think as I talked with more and more friends cautiously about sexual related things, I found there was just this ocean of experience and insight and interest that made me feel like, wow, there's just a lot of untapped interest here and insight. And I decided it would be kind of fun to stoke that by sharing myself in this vulnerable way. And what started off that Christmas as a sort of jokey experience with, ribbons on myself became in odd ways a meaningful shared experience with many of my friends, where it's become a tradition, a habit, a routine of showing ourselves to each other. And it's exactly, Joanne, what you said, not about sex per se. There is way more of it that's this artistic, intimate experience. This is who I am. It's very rarely people dressed up and adopting some kind of absurd pose and putting on a show. It's more just, hey, I just got out of the shower and I kind of like myself today, and I want you all to kind of be there with me.
Quick question for you, Rebecca. How does your husband feel about this?
I really have this as a woman-centered experience. So my husband is very rarely the recipient or involved. I will say I did have one photo shoot with a very close woman friend. We took photos of one another, and the photos came out pretty great. And I did compile them into a book that I gifted to Bill one holiday, and he loves it. So that was like a nice bonus that he got to experience. But he's not the type of person who is texting all day long. And so it's not part of our habit that I would enclose it. But every so often he gets one. He likes it.
On the subject of gifts and things that you can purchase, we are going to take a brief break to hear from our advertisers, and we will be right back. So I love what you were saying about the way in which this was kind of something that came about, not post-motherhood, because you're still very much in motherhood, but it's sort of accompanying motherhood, because I think that one thing that I run into a lot is that as a mom, especially of young kids, I sometimes really struggle to see myself. Like I am a function. I am, I have a very loving husband and children, but I do a lot of stuff for them all the time. And I'm always doing stuff, and I'm mom, I'm honey, or I'm, when's dinner. And the feeling of being something that is totally outside of my immediate, of being sexy and sexual, just kind of for the purpose of being sexy and sexual, I found that really powerful. I haven't taken that many nude photos, but just anytime I have, like, the way that feeling good about yourself makes you feel powerful is feeling sexy makes you feel powerful is it's something that I really hunger for these days.
So you write erotic literature. Let's talk about that, Rebecca.
Yes. So what's interesting is that it was Gabby who turned me on, pun intended, to writing and starting off with reading erotic literature. So many years ago, when we were probably in our early 20s, I had been cautiously discussing, my sexual interests and fantasies with Gabby, just, for the heck of it, pushing boundaries as I often do. And I think I was saying something along the lines of traditional video pornography is not that interesting to me. It's not that imaginative or beautiful. And Gabby said, you have a great imagination. You might enjoy reading. You might enjoy erotica in a written story form. And I have this website that you should really check out. And she told me to look at literotica.com. And I found it and started going through it and understood that it's a lot of just amateur writers, people who have fantasies or have a certain interest or just have a talent for writing, who come together in this online community and share these stories of these experiences that may be real and based in their personal history, or it might be totally wacky, imaginative things. And the categories will blow your mind. I mean, there are categories that are very standard, most of it is just couples, erotic couplings is like one of the main categories. And that you're going to find all of your standard, husband and wife, boyfriend, girlfriend, strangers on a train kind of a thing. But then you get into other categories, like there's mind control, there's alien, there's
inanimate objects.
Yeah. So anything that has ever interested you, come to mind, is there. You can find it, and you can find your erotic friends there for sure. So I've been reading it for years. I love it. Some of the stories are incredibly beautifully written. And it wasn't until the past year that I suddenly kind of got to the end of what I found interesting on the site, that were my types of interests. And I decided, what if I kind of wrote one out myself? Like, what if I picked a fantasy that really is my fantasy and wrote it exactly as I'd want it? I sat down with the intention of just playing around with it. I have rarely had this experience in my entire life. It poured out of me. I almost blacked out on time. I mean, I started to write, and usually I'm very careful with my writing. I keep a thesaurus open and I'm really choosing my words with thought. Nope, I just ran for it, and it just came out in one long stream of consciousness that when I went back and read it later, I was like, this is actually pretty good. I'm proud of this. And I think one of the first things I did, a little bit cautiously, was share it with Gabby and share it with other friends. And it was a lot, even for my close and playful friends. It was really delving into deep fantasies of mine. And that made it thrilling because I've pushed the envelope so many times with so many things. I actually rarely get to a point anymore where I'm like, ooh, taking a deep breath, like really putting myself out there. But I was addicted. And since then, I've written probably about 8 multi-page stories on different topics, totally different locations, models, themes, and every single one, I'm just totally immersed and loving it.
Well,
Amazing.
I'm not going to share your pen name, but I will say that I happen to know that, first of all, I will say they are extremely well written. They're evocative and they're tight and well structured, and they've gotten thousands, like tens of thousands of views. Am I correct?
Oh, yeah. My most popular one, which is on a topic I will not even share here, but a popular topic in this genre has gotten.
Oh my God, you can share the topic, can't you?
Can I? Okay. Anal sex.
All right, go on.
Yeah.
There, she said it. Nothing happened. Nothing just happened.
We'll bring you back for our fisting episode.
Oh, God.
I wish you guys could see the look on Joe's face.
The places you take me. Oh, my God. All right. So Rebecca has agreed to read an excerpt of some of her most tame erotic literature, right? Because I am still the queen of the prudiverse. I can't help myself. I have to represent. I keep thinking, my mom passed away many years ago, but I see her just shaking her head right now going, is this how I raised you? And with that,
I really had to dig to find something tame enough to share. I had to find the tamest portion of my tamest story.
Go for it.
Okay. Hey, he breathed as he sized her up approvingly. He would normally try to be cool and contained, but he was all in. This weekend was theirs, and there was no time to waste. He took another step, and his arms encircled her waist, pulling her roughly towards him. Her eyes widened in happy surprise at his eagerness, and her lips parted into a big grin, inviting a kiss whose force pressed her against the concrete wall as he thrust his tongue against hers. I need to get you out of here, he groaned. He grabbed her hand and pulled her towards the taxi line, but not without stopping one more time to press her up against a fence for one more deep, hard kiss. What are you doing? He asked as their taxi sped along the highway to their beach hotel. She was twisting her arms under her shirt and adjusting something. I'm overheating, she teased, just as she pulled her lacy black bra out from under the thin, silky shirt and stuffed it into her purse with a sideways glance towards their oblivious driver. "You're killing me," he whispered, moaning, pulling her long brown hair to the side for his lips to touch her ear desperately. She was enchanted by his excitement. The man from the campaign trail never lost control, never expressed any weakness. Yet here he was, weak, desperate for her.
Awesome.
Then we go out
I
for
loved it.
coffee and a bookstore, and that's it.
That's it.
So good.
Nothing else happens.
Yep, that's I mean, something's going to happen, but I really actually did think that it was really well, it was very well structured, but it also, you hold back in a really enjoyable way. You don't give it, that's good. That's what good writing is not going full force from the outset. You really want to bring the reader along with you and
create tension. I think what's interesting to me is, Rebecca, you mentioned that sort of traditional pornography has never really done it for you, nor has it for me. And I haven't seen very much at all, but what I've seen has made me somewhat uncomfortable. And I think part of the problem is that it hasn't had the buildup. It hasn't had that flirty tension. Is something going to happen? Is something not going to happen? Those sort of subtle pieces, which maybe, and I don't want to really generalize here because I'm sure there are many women for whom that sort of male-centered traditional pornography works really, really well. But I would venture to guess that for a lot of women, what you're describing, both in terms of what you do with photography and what you're doing here with literature, really takes into consideration more the way that women's sexuality builds over time and requires all that sort of.
And you can go at
Am
your
I
own
making
pace.
too many Yes.
With porn, you could go at your own pace with porn as well. But I find with erotica, I can reread a passage over and over again. If it's really working for me, and there's an actual, in good erotica, in my opinion, there's an actual story. And I'm sure there is porn out there with more of a story, but I haven't really found much of it.
It's hard to find.
Also, I think in a lot of traditional porn, women didn't have agency.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I know that that's changed. There is women-geared porn now, but
women-made porn.
I still like words. Yes.
Have you written any erotica, Gabby? Have you written any?
So, okay. I wrote one really sexy thing once that I didn't do anything with. But here's the thing here's like an open secret about erotica. And that is that I really, really hate the category women's literature for books, because I kind of feel like, when Jonathan Franzen writes about sex and family and love and loss, it's called literature. But if Jennifer Weiner does it, this is literally those two authors. It's been a long thing in the New York Times between the two of them. But, when Jennifer Weiner or a Meg Wolitzer or a similar writer writes it, it's women's literature. It's a beach read. It's chick lit. And I've always thought that was kind of BS because, first of all, there is far more women-geared literature out there. And most of it, as is true with much literature written by men, there are raunchy, awesome sex scenes in so much women's literature. And I just completed my 10th draft of a novel I've been working on for a long time that definitely falls into the unfortunately named category of women's literature. And the people in it have sex a bunch of times. So I would love to read for you a passage that is it's not super long, but but just sort of one I love and that I feel like is really evocative. And so I'll just dive into it. She finally let her eyes meet his, and it was as electric as she feared it would be. They stood there in the shallow end of the pool, his hands still on her shoulders, her arms at her sides, breathing in sync. Without taking his hands off of her, he very slowly ran his fingertips down her bare arms. He slipped his arms around her waist and pulled her into a hug, pressing his thighs against hers. She let her arms find his shoulders, and as they held each other, her wet spandex sports bra stuck to his bare chest like a suction cup. She felt him move his chin to the side, and she knew what was about to happen. And then they were kissing, and he was running his hands all over the small of her back and her hips. He reached down the waistband of her running shorts with both hands and squeezed big handfuls of her ass. His mouth felt hot in contrast to the cold water surrounding them, and when he licked and sucked the soft patch of skin that ran from her earlobe to the nape of her neck, the same way she had loved when he did it when they were young, guttural, involuntary moans escaped her mouth and echoed loudly throughout the natatorium.
Ow!
Hot. Wow.
Really good. Really good.
Thank
We
you.
can't wait to read. We can't wait to read your book, Abby. What's it called?
So right now it's tentatively called Wildfire Season. We'll see. I played around with a few titles. Something
I like that.
It's about I think that it works well. It's not too on the nose. I had been playing with Old Flames because it's about this couple that dated a long time ago and they reconnect in a place where there have been wildfires. But I kind of feel like Wildfire Season is more evocative, but I'm not sure. So listeners, if you're writing a book, please don't name it Wildfire Season or Old Flames until I get my book contract secure. We'll circle back on that one.
We're so trusting.
And what about you?
Well, I do not write erotica. However, I am in a writing group and we recently got a prompt to write about a smell. And there were subcategory choices, and one of them was a signature smell. Are you ready? So this is written by I wrote it just recently, but it is in the voice of 14-year-old Joanne. Okay, so I'm in the 9th grade. Just a brief whiff of his neck, a tiny sniff of that soft pink skin laced with perfect platinum peach fuzz, launched a reverberating chain reaction of unprecedented sensation. An orchestra of strings swelling, chills rippling up my arms and down my legs. Is this normal? Is it merely a scent that's hurled me into an alternate universe, rendered me helpless, a mass of quivering flesh on the precipice of out of control, at the mercy of who knows what? What is happening to me? This is way more than what I felt at age 10 at the Coolidge Corner movie theater watching A Hard Day's Night when Paul, he who needs no last name, looked directly at me. I loved the Beatles, but Paul had stolen my heart. How in the world could his grin, the way he cocked his head to the left, make my stomach flip upside down in a way that was so much better than any roller coaster or when someone ran their nails up and down my back? But this electrocuted nerve endings, this sudden I don't know who or what I am and I don't care, as though someone changed the channel, took over my mind and body all at once, replaced it with what can only be described as temporary euphoria, meadows filled with bright yellow flowers swaying in a warm breeze, technicolor rainbows and a million shooting stars, sunlight glinting on freshly fallen snow. How could a fragrance, an odor, a simple smell trigger such a phenomenon? Pipe down, Shakespeare. It's just a product, for God's sakes. A liquid formula created in a laboratory and mass marketed to men and boys everywhere. Wait, is it possible that it only has this reaction on me? Could this unique mix of chemicals somehow be awakening hidden sensory receptors in my body alone? Or perhaps I've discovered something. They'd have to redo their ad campaigns. But if it could do this for others, how could they sell this in stores? Its power is too great. And if they did, how could anyone afford to buy it? No price would be too high. And yet they named it after a savagely violent person or animal. Yes, that is what had me in its grip. Something fierce, uncontrolled, primitive, uncivilized. Just one word. One word minus the final letter. The culprit was Brute.
So
Now, you guys
good.
probably don't even know what Brute is, but Brute was a cologne that every ninth grade boy wore.
I remember it had like a little green bottle.
Yes, in 1968 or 67, this even might have been. And it, the mere scent of it drove me and probably 2 or 3 other people wild.
Wait. Am I allowed to assign homework here? Do I have your permission?
Yes.
Because my assignment for you, Joanne, is you need to pick that up about 10 years later, 20 years later, where you are walking down a street and you pass a man wearing that cologne, and then you need to write what happens next.
Ooh.
I agree.
I might have to follow him. Because 10 years after that, I was just 24 and I hadn't met my husband yet.
Great. Well, make it happen.
So I have a question. So Joanne, you in that piece, you say, is this normal? What, you talk about feeling like it's not normal. Can you say more about that?
Yeah, I got some bad messaging from my mom, the world, my sister. I had a sister 8 years older than me. And the message was it was an implicit message that sex was something boys wanted and needed. And it was something you had that you could withhold. And that was your power. Your power was to not give in to them. There was never any mention of the fact that girls had sexual desire or even enjoyed sex or could enjoy sex. I thought orgasms was something men had, boys had. Didn't know. Literally read about it in Ms. Magazine when I was in college. Didn't know girls masturbated, only thought boys did that. Yeah, so I don't think I was alone in this. So I'm giving you a little perspective from an earlier generation. I'm not suggesting that your moms experienced this. My mom was 40 when she had me, so she was really much older, and she was first generation American, and I'm sure there was never any discussion of sexuality in her home. You were a virgin when you got married, or you were bad. And so the thought of me being a sexual being meant that I was bad and maybe out of control, because I heard about nymphomaniacs, and what if I was one? Like, how could I live? So yeah, that's where that is this normal comes from.
What was the process of, letting go of the idea that you were bad? Like, do you feel like you did let go of that idea over time?
Oh yeah, eventually. But it's still, those kind of seeds stick around. And so the simplest way I can put it is that when Fred and I first got married, I remember thinking, wait a minute, my mother thinks I'm supposed to be having sex with you. That's not sexy. So, it's that thing of, there's a certain, I think we haven't even mentioned why all of this is called filth. It's because there's something about sexy being bad, dirty, wrong, not meadows and flowers and shooting stars and rainbows, but rather something like you had used the word raunchy. That's where it all comes from. And I think for a lot of people, in order for something to be titillating, in order for something to be sexy, it has to be somehow bad or dirty. What do you think?
Yeah, I think that's how a lot of kinks get going from, something being a taboo, something you're not supposed to talk about, something that, when sex still is a taboo to a certain extent, in that it's generally considered private, and you don't, discuss it in mixed company or with someone you don't know that well. And
unless you're a guy,
there is a line. There's a line, I think, that straddles that's very intentional phrasing, that straddles, you know, honoring sensitive, private stuff and can sort of veer into the idea of repression. And I think one place, I know we always talk about pregnancy and babies on this show, but I remember there were so many things that came up around getting pregnant and having babies. And honestly, it started at my wedding when, to your point about what your mom was saying, or about how your mom, wanted you to be having sex with your new husband. There were so many jokes in the speeches about the sex we were going to be having from my relatives. And that's like classic wedding fare, right? Get going on the grandkids. And it was like, none of these people have ever said anything about my sex life before, but now that I'm married, it's somehow, yeah, right, exactly. Unless it's, after I had my first kid, then it's when are you going to have your next kid? But that's,
has nothing to do with sex, actually, Gabby. It doesn't have to do with sex.
Right. right. So yeah, I think that we'll link in our show notes some very interesting studies I found about the impact of cultural repression on sexual self-identification. I think that the conversation we're having is far more interesting than the research that I found, but there is a real connection. And, Beck, you've always been someone I've considered very sexually liberated. Can you speak at all to the experience of being someone who, like you were saying, you were a consummate flirt when you were younger, and, how that has evolved? Can you say anything about that?
Yes. Well, I think it's really interesting, Joanne, your comments about coming up, in a certain age when certain things were frowned upon. And I think I speak for both Gabby and myself when I say, having come of age in the 90s in Northern California, you would have expected a total flip and a total sense of openness and liberation. And both Gabby and I would say that we still grew up feeling a lot of the same messages, not through any bad intentions of the wonderfully open-minded people we grew up around and people who we were raised by. But there's something so deep. It's like you said, those seeds are planted, those messages are set, and that is what we grow up with. And because I was always a sexually curious, even as a kid, kind of person, I definitely felt like something was wrong with me. I certainly felt like my interests or curiosities were not normal. And I remember the day in 8th grade when a group of us sat down on the gym floor and someone brought up masturbation. I remember being absolutely mortified, to even think that this could be something discussed with other kids, in any kind of public setting. And it made me angry as I got older to realize that part of me that was such an authentic and interesting part of myself got so kind of beaten down. And so I think that my journey has been, you all know me as a crusader. I have an interest, I have a mission, and I'm going to be out there fighting for it. I mean, I'm relentless. That is my personal brand. So I really have taken it as, hey, this is good, wholesome fun. As Gabby mentioned, there's sort of this spectrum. It's like sex is either this glorious, sacred marital thing, or it's this taboo, dirty thing. I am interested in all of that middle space, just the playfulness and fun of it. And it doesn't have to be sacred, but it also doesn't have to be obscene to an extreme. It can just be a joyful, good time with consenting people who are expressing themselves. And so for me, my process, my journey has been to even have to push myself a little bit to embrace that and say, this is okay. This is good. And to send that messaging to my friends as well. Like, this is all right. We can share this stuff. And I hope by doing that we pass those messages along to our kids as well.
Amen. I love what you're saying.
Can you leave us, just as we wrap up our episode, with a couple of suggestions for anyone who's wanting to kind of dip their toe in being a little more open and, or, engaging with, let's call it filth, in a way that, is accessible for newbies?
Yes, I definitely think you have to start with yourself first. I think going to literotica.com and searching for something that's maybe a secret fantasy of yours is a great way to start, because it'll immediately give you the satisfaction of seeing that it's already out there and shared by others. I think that taking even one nude photo of yourself, start there, like yourself, have fun with yourself. You don't have to send it to anyone, but maybe you're tempted, do it. And the last thing I would say is there's lots of active internet communities around all sorts of things. Even on Facebook, you can find kink groups and sort of sensual groups, and you can just have that content just be part of the background of your life. You don't have to engage. You don't have to be visible or public about it, but just acquaint yourself with it. Get comfy with it and see what happens. You don't need to push yourself. It doesn't all need to be some kind of epic thrill challenge. Just start small. But there are parts of you probably haven't met yet, and those parts are really fun to meet.
I love it. Thank you so much. This was so great. And thank you so much for joining us. It was so fun to have you here today.
You've set the bar very high for our future guests.
Thank you. I feel genuinely honored, and I love both of you so much. So this is a total treat for me. Thank you.
We love you too.
Thanks so much for listening to All the F Words, our episode on filth. Maybe we've redefined the term for you just a little bit today. We hope if you like our show that you follow us and rate us and check us out on social media. Gabby will give you the details.
We are on Instagram, Twitter, Facebook, and YouTube. And we would love to hear from you. Email us your kinks, email us your favorite erotic literature, or questions or comments. We are allthefwordspod@gmail.com. We would love to hear from you.
Have a great week. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye.